Eating scrambled eggs and bacon while going through country like this was one of the pleasantest parts of the whole trip. And the relaxed atmosphere on board, in contrast to air travel, both cramped and disorientating, is perhaps one reason why Amtrak has gained an additional 4 million passengers a year in only 9 years of operating.
Well, we wanted to try Amtrak. My wife hasn't been on a train in a long time, and I was on a train in Mexico in April, and I wanted to see how the trains here were. It's been many years since I've been on a train in the United States.
What do you think of it?
Well, so far, it's been very nice. I slept like a baby.
After breakfast, one can move around, visit the observation dome or the club car, when, unlike in English trains where we all try and avoid each other, one can meet plenty of fellow passengers just dying to pass the time of day.
Being on the train, it's a little tiring at times. You don't get all the sleep that you'd like to get. But for what you can see, and the most beneficial thing out of the whole thing, I think, is the people that you meet. Cross sections of the country, different people that you've never seen before, who at the time, the first time you meet them, they're kind of like a stranger to you. But after you've met a person once, then they become your friend.
I've had a daughter living in Marin County, that's near San Francisco, since 1961, and I've been on this train twice a year since 1961. And now I live out there now. Now I'm just back visiting.
Do you like flying?
No, I like the train better.
I don't like planes. I don't trust anybody, let alone, pilots or these men I've never met. And I get very uncomfortable in a plane, and I feel it physically. Even the movement of the train bothers me, but planes is intolerable.
I'm going for the 9th Annual National Free University and Learning Network Conference, which is being held there in Denver this year. And it's a weekend conference, and there'll be about representatives from some of the 200 free universities from around the country.
I had a teacher who was an anthropologist, and each year we take a different, we read about the Eskimos, and we read about the Africans in the next year. And I'm an English major. I hear about books from her that I'd never heard of, because she lived with an African tribe for a year, and so she's well informed. She's an anthropologist.
I help operate Full Circle Resource Exchange, which is what we call a learning network. And the network is a telephone information referral service. And so that we put people in contact with each other so that they can teach, learn, and share interests with each other.
Each planet and each constellation has a certain vibration. And they manifest in different combinations in different ways on, and affect human beings in different ways.
When we had King Tut, in San Francisco for all those months, the Tutankamon exhibit, I took a wonderful course in that from a gal who had studied, really studied it. And I've taken history of art courses, so I knew a little bit about King Tut, but I really enjoyed that course.
Astrologers can certainly tell, homicidal maniacs. You can certainly, see that in a chart.
I belong to one group of over 50s, and everybody in that group has moved out there because their children, his or her children, have moved out there. That's the history of California.
Denver, Colorado. Time for a wash and brush up for the train, maybe for some of the passengers too.
We're going to tie a string to the train so it won't get away from us since we're coming back.
Most will be back on board when it pulls out later. But I'm going off into the Rockies on a brief excursion and will rejoin the Zephyr in a few days' time.
Sleeping cars in the one baggage car below. Thank you.
After the Mississippi, the Rocky Mountains were the second great natural barrier to the building of a railroad west. But after the discovery of gold and silver in these hills, the early pioneers soon opened the country up. The rolling stock and equipment of those early steam trains has now mostly disappeared, though only Americans, perhaps, would think of dismantling an old water tower like this and rebuilding it as a mountain greenery home. A whistle toot away stands another home fashioned from old railway stock. Two cabooses carted 8,000 feet up a mountain and knocked together by a new-style pioneer, a young Easterner, Jim Keith.
We were looking for an alternative lifestyle, alternative kind of house that we could afford, and we got the idea of using a railroad caboose. Our biggest problem when starting out was people were used to the Grapes of Wrath kind of idea of a boxcar where the migrant workers are living in this little structure. So it was kind of hard to convince people that it was okay to bring them in and do it. And luckily we started long enough ago that the restrictions from the counties and such just weren't so strong as they are today.
Was it a hell of a job getting this caboose up here on top of this 8,000-foot hill?
Well, this was a little easier. As I had the first caboose for experience, and Charlotte and I, my wife, were able to live up here with our boys throughout the summer. And the weather was good enough, and we could stay in a tent, do it ourselves. We did it without hooking up electricity, so we hand drilled all our connections and hand sawed everything, and just did everything. It was very aesthetic, and it felt good to do our own house, and yet do it financially where it wasn't a burden. After 3 cars, we found we had the equipment and the know-how to do it, continue doing it. So we immediately, when we were done here in our local town, put together a store out of several more train cars, and now we sell the train cars and deliver them anywhere someone would like.
If Jim Keith is one example of successful free enterprise, the railroad that operates the other side of the hill from him is another. It's the Denver and Rio Grande, the only long-distance passenger train not owned by Amtrak, and which goes through some of the most spectacular scenery in the country. 3 days a week, its 6 coaches make the 600-mile, 14-hour trip from Denver to Salt Lake City. On the other 3, it returns. The company makes so much profit on its freight trains that Amtrak refuses to take over its passenger service. It's a happy train, this, for most of the passengers are on holiday, bound for the skiing slopes in winter, for the lakes and rivers in summer. The Union Pacific route bypasses the Rockies by going north of them, and a day or 2 later I drove from Denver to Cheyenne, and also from summer to winter to board the Zephyr once more. But when I reached Cheyenne and made my way to the old Union Station in the center of the town, I found that the Zephyr didn't run there anymore, and some of the passengers weren't best pleased.
I think they stink. At least this one from Cheyenne to San Francisco. Well, not only that, I hear in the last month since we've been here, they've had 3 derailments right outside of town here. And then I understand the month before that, they had another one, a big one. And it just seems like it looks like the whole thing is sort of deteriorating, running down. They say that they don't stop here now because they back it in about 10 miles and they have to back it out, and it'll save an hour from Denver to San Francisco by doing that, and it'll save 30 minutes from Chicago to San Francisco. But I think that's ridiculous. We've been riding this train now at least 50 years, and I don't see why they want to change it now, because it certainly doesn't help that much.
So the Zephyr's passengers were all ferried out by bus to a halt called Borry, some 10 miles away. And here a path was hacked out for us through snow and ice to reach the expected train. As you can see, there's not much more to Borry than its name. And to add to the general euphoria, the Zephyr, are you surprised, was almost an hour late.
Give you a hand.
No.
Just a minute, let me come down.
Okay. Let us take this one.
Take your time.
This kind of weather.
Good show, good show. Watch your step,
You read me, Bernowski?
Amtrak 5, come in.
Amtrak 5.
You're 10 minutes ago. You can proceed at normal speed.
Proceed at normal speed. Thank you very much.
Beyond Cheyenne is the desert. Mile upon mile of it, wrote Robert Louis Stevenson, and not a tree, a bird, or a river. The train, he went on, was the one piece of life in all the deadly land. It was the one actor, the one spectacle fit to be observed in this paralysis of man and nature. It was across this wilderness in the winter of 1868 that the Irish labourers of the Union Pacific forged the tracks of the first railroad to the west. With them went a brilliant young photographer named A.J. Russell, who has left us this record of their endeavours. The labourers had much to contend with: the harsh weather, primitive living conditions, and nothing to spend their pay on but whores and liquor in the shanty towns that sprang up along the track. Roaring impromptu cities, Stevenson called them, full of gold and lust and death. In addition, there were often attacks by local Indians, who rightly saw the coming of the iron horse as a lasting threat to their buffalo grazing grounds. But, despite all, the men pushed on, surveying, grading, blasting. Meanwhile, across the high Sierras, another line was coming from the west, that of the Central Pacific, with its workforce of some 5,000 Chinese. They had to carve a track up to and over the 7,000-foot-high Donner Pass. At first, their physique was suspect, but they soon proved to be every bit as hard-working and efficient as the Irish of the Union Pacific, and a good deal more sober. In the spring of 1869, when the two lines were only a few miles apart, the Central Pacific's chief engineer won a wager of $10,000 when his men completed laying 10 miles of track in one day, a feat that has never been equaled anywhere in the world. Today, the meeting place in northern Utah has become a national park. The main line no longer runs here, but they've relayed a mile or two of track and built replicas of the two engines that originally faced each other that day, the Central Pacific's Jupiter and the Union Pacific's 119. And on every anniversary of the joining of the two lines, local townspeople dress up as the chief participants and, in their actual words, reenact the ceremony of the Golden Spike as it took place on May the 10th, 1869.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the officials of both railroads, the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific, I bid you welcome. We are met today to commemorate the completion